That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the BamaOnLine YouTube channel. We're here to react to Alabama's 27-24 victory over Auburn. Jimmy, I don't even really know what to say. I mean, it's days later. It's crazy. Going into the game, I kind of talked a little bit about how there were some similarities to the 2021 matchup, and just it's a 6-5 Auburn team. No one was really giving them a chance. In fact, I want to say Alabama was an even bigger favorite 2 years ago. But then they push them gave them all they want for not only 4 quarters but 4 overtimes too. Alabama comes out with a 24-22 victory. Here we are 2 years later. All hope seemed lost, especially when that snap went. That snap from Seth McLaughlin went by Jalen Milroe. It kind of felt like the game was over, much in the same way that most of that Iron Bowl in 2021 felt over. But yet again, it was a team that wasn't willing to give up. They kept battling and figuring out ways to overcome the adversity, and they ended up winning the football game 27-24. So just what were your reactions? Kind of take me through it, because I mean, there were so many people that came on and commented on our video or preview, and they were kind of, hey, Alabama's going to roll Auburn. I don't know why anybody's giving them a chance. And it's like, it's the Iron Bowl. I don't care what happened the week before. I don't care what happened with New Mexico State to me. And a lot of other people, wasn't just me. There was a lot, but it was, um, you know, uh, the New Mexico State result kind of made you feel more uneasy about the Iron Bowl. So just, you thought, now granted, I think we both were very much in agreement that Alabama was a lot more talented, and they should win the game by a large margin. But we also understood what this game entails. So just take me through the process of kind of going in thinking Alabama, should they continue to handle business, they should get a sizable win. It ends up being close. I mean, just take us through your thought process.
Yeah, I thought Alabama would win the game going into it, not easily, but handily, meaning that Alabama would win the game, but not blow them out, and Alabama would win and wouldn't be stressed. Now, Alabama was obviously max stressed, and Auburn turned it into a 60-minute game. And I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised because I think we're both familiar with the Iron Bowl and Auburn somehow finding a way to play over their heads, which they do. Hey, I'm giving them a shout out here. I mean, how they're able to dig deep and find something that wasn't there before when it's this game in their place. How they're able to do that so consistently is pretty amazing. Maybe Alabama can learn something from that when Alabama's playing, Georgia and these other national games coming up. I mean, Auburn seems to find a way, to create a 60-minute game. Now, all credit to Alabama, particularly the heroes at the very end, Jalen and Isaiah Bond for making just not great plays, historical plays that will never be forgotten in the history of Alabama football. That's how big that was. 4th and 31 is now a part of our lexicon, no different than 2nd and 26, thanks to that play. But Clint, in a game that goes 60 minutes and is decided by one play at the end, that also means it was decided by the one plays that led up to that. I mean, if it wasn't for other play, Jahad Campbell recovering the fumbled punt, Roy Dale Williams making that key 4th down play, Jalen Milroe scrambling for 19 and a half yards on a 3rd and 20. Plays in the first half that led to points were big. The bomb to Jermaine Burton helped win the game, because obviously in a game like that, every single point counts. Every single point you stop them from getting counts. And which also leads us to this. And I'll ask you, I mean, there was also a lot of bad in this game. There was a lot of bad plays. Credit Auburn, credit also Alabama's road errors, continuing in kind of a cavalcade of errors that Alabama tends to make in these SEC road games, once again showed up. It as heroic as Alabama's performance might have been, it wasn't Alabama's cleanest game, right?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And that was the tough part. It was, I wouldn't have been shocked if the offense struggled some. I mean, it's kind of been the up and down side of the football this year. And, you know, just it being in a hostile road environment, you're going to have the crowd at that defense's back. You would just fully expect, to at least some degree, um, you would expect them to struggle. But at the same time, what I wasn't expecting was the poor performance from the run defense. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, Hugh Freeze having multiple weeks to prepare for this game. He didn't really have multiple weeks, but he did use multiple weeks to prepare for Alabama. We said going in that was going to cause some issues, or it could cause some issues, and that's exactly what ended up happening. There were some new wrinkles added as far as using misdirection and multiple pullers to kind of confuse the off-ball linebackers. You kind of had a combination of factors with the off-ball linebackers. Number one, Deontay Lawson was not 100% healthy. He did play in this game. He had missed the previous two with an ankle injury, but just watching him, he looked a step slow for a majority of the game. What did not play his best football at all. He had a couple of really good moments. I don't want to say that he was terrible or completely bad, or I wouldn't even go as far as to say he was a liability, but this was not his best football. That factored in. You had Tresman Marshall, who only played 5 snaps in the game, by the way. I don't think a lot of people realize that. He did not play a ton. He played a lot early. Jahad Campbell got the start next to Deontay Lawson. Then they rotated Marshall in. Marshall had, I don't know if he's not healthy. Maybe it's still a rib injury, but he just did not play very good football. And then really from that point forward, it was Jahad Campbell and it was Deontay Lawson pretty much all the time. And then Lawson was the every down linebacker in those rare dime situations, which you didn't see a ton of on Saturday against Auburn. But at the same time, there were some occasions where you saw 6 defensive backs and only 1 linebacker, and that certainly played into it as well. But so you had Tresman Marshall really struggling, and then a young Jahad Campbell who's still learning the off-ball position. He played some of that in high school, but a lot of people thought he was going to be an edge rusher on the next level. He's played off ball since he arrived in Tuscaloosa, but there's, as far as run fits and responsibilities and stuff, he kind of fell for some eye candy. And I think based off of, Auburn looked at how Alabama's linebackers make their reads, and they did some things sending pullers to the opposite side of where the run was going to kind of pull those guys away from the direction that it was actually going. And Jahad Campbell really struggled with that. So you saw a lack of numbers or a lack of defenders to the play side wherever it was going, and that caused some problems. So it was like a combination of factors, and that led to a lot of chunk runs for Auburn, which is why they ran for 244 yards. I think it was closer to 270 plus when you take out the sack numbers. But you also had some miscues in pass coverage as well, which we'll talk about. But it was a combination of factors. But I was really shocked at how consistently Auburn was able to move the football. And I think from Alabama's perspective, and we talked about this going in, if you can stop Auburn's run game, you stop Auburn's offense, because they're not going to be able to pivot and play off the shoulders of Peyton Thorne through the air. The problem is I think Alabama thought they would be more effective stopping the run. They planned to get an early lead and ride that lead and be able to tee off with their pass rush. Obviously, when you look at the pass rush rate success from both Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell, a ton of success on Saturday, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But Alabama thought we'll be able to dominate their offensive line. It's gotten better, but it's still not very good. And we'll be able to put consistent pressure on Peyton Thorne, which they were able to do. The problem is Auburn was having so much success on early downs and really just so much success running the football that Alabama never got too many opportunities to get after the quarterback.
Yeah, one thing that we were right about, I remember we were signing off our show last week, the Auburn preview, and we talked a lot about how Auburn's probably going to get their 300 yards somehow or another. They would get it. And we talked about how, they're probably going to get it in the ground game, because they're just not going to, if they're going to gain 300 yards in this game, they're not going to gain over 200 of it in the air, because that's not Auburn. They're not good enough to do that. Alabama won't allow them to do that, but they are pretty good at running the ball, and they're going to get yards somehow. So let's assume that Auburn is going to run for, I think I remember you saying 150. I thought maybe closer to 200, but the answer was probably going to be in the middle somewhere. Well, they ran it better than that. They ran it better than we saw it coming, but we also weren't crazy far off. I think they ran for 244 in the game, which is, I would say, substantially more than we thought, but not crazy more, not double more than we thought. But the problem was Alabama's red zone problems on offense allowed the offense that Auburn was able to muster to make it a 60-minute game. It really wasn't a 60-minute game if Alabama scored 40 points. And Alabama certainly had the offense to do that, but they just didn't play clean enough to do it. There were just too many errors on offense, whether you're talking about Milroe past the line of scrimmage, whether you're talking about penalties, a touchdown getting called back. One of the things I want to do today is recount today on the roundtable at BOL, I want to recount all the touchdowns called back for Alabama and how that would dramatically change Alabama's stats for the year. If you counted all those touchdowns that Alabama's called back, off the top of my head, it's a crazy number, like 8. It might be 9, but I'm going to count them up again today. It's just nuts. But Alabama, again, 2 more touchdowns called back due to penalty. And I think those things kept the game close. Auburn's run game clearly kept the game close, and that's what's disappointing to me, Clint. I know we'll talk more about Georgia later, but Georgia also had trouble stopping Auburn's run game. Auburn rushed for 219 against Georgia, 244 against Alabama. Georgia gave up 200 yards rushing to a Georgia Tech team this Saturday. So that's something that Alabama's got to look at going forward in terms of putting a game plan together for the Bulldogs. But overall, I was disappointed in the Alabama run defense. But here's this will surprise people if you haven't read this already or seen it. Alabama gave up 320 yards rushing to Auburn a year ago. 320, substantially more than they gave up this past Saturday. So this is 2 years in a row that Auburn has absolutely gouged Alabama on the ground. It's just that last year we weren't as upset about it because Alabama scored enough points to where it didn't really matter that Auburn had some success on the ground, because Alabama won the game handily because they did play a cleaner game and scored when they had all the opportunities to score, and they did under Bryce. But this year the game was closer because of Alabama's offensive errors, because of the touchdowns that were called back, because of, frankly, some questionable officiating at times, kept the game closer. Therefore, Auburn's 244 this year seemed bigger than their 320 last year.
Yeah, I mean, the game was every yard was that much more important. I thought they did a pretty good job of keeping Alabama's offense off the field and having some long, sustaining drives. And you would think, with as limited as Auburn is throwing the football, that Alabama would have committed more to stopping the run. And here's the thing: I do believe that they did. Like, maybe we didn't see as much single high, putting more numbers in the boxes maybe you would expect, or maybe some other teams have. But I do think, playing Caleb Downs, and we'll get to that in a second, at star, you play Malachi Moore at safety. That's a much more physical, sure tackling presence at the star position. I think there was a purpose for that in this game. I also think there was more future importance to going ahead and doing that. And so that was something that was a little bit different. And actually, let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get back to the run game. It kind of all fits together. So you had Caleb Downs play star. You had Malachi Moore play safety. They essentially switched positions. It's not like that was a new thing for either one. Malachi Moore has started games at safety. He spent the entire spring at safety. It was not like that this was some new position that he was still getting used to. It's not like Caleb Downs hasn't played some star. Granted, it's been very situational. It's been against certain packages in certain games, and he hadn't done a ton of it, but he certainly played it. But with them each kind of making that switch full time, on top of the fact, and I'll continue to reiterate this, you're going against Hugh Freeze, a very innovative offensive mind. I think I'm pretty convinced here that he spent a substantial amount of time preparing for Alabama. He had a lot of new wrinkles, whether it be with the run game, whether it be some of the route concepts and the things that they did to kind of create some confusion with Alabama's secondary. Uh, and so when you have that factor, you throw that factor in, I don't think Caleb Downs was ready to play star full time when you're throwing the Hugh Freeze, throwing all these wrinkles and new things at him. And so that created some communication issues in the secondary. Guys weren't always covering guys. There was some breakdowns in coverage, and Malachi Moore was responsible for some of that too. Mainly because even though he's played safety, there was a lot being thrown at him. And there were some times, I mean, it was clear when you go back and watch where, there was some miscommunication on one particular one. I want to say it was a touchdown for Auburn, if I'm not mistaken, where both Malachi Moore and Kool-Aid McKinstry are both covering the same guy. And then it left another guy, Johnson, wide open, and he ended up having a big play or making a big play. And so is that concerning? To some degree. I think both guys will get more comfortable with it as, we continue to go on here. And I think that it was kind of important because it's very possible that Alabama ends up playing Caleb Downs at star against Georgia. Why? When you really look, I think they've been playing him closer to the line of scrimmage or trying to get him to play more over the slot and do some of those different things over the last few weeks. You saw it a little bit more against Kentucky. You saw it quite a bit against UT Chattanooga, and you saw it against Auburn. And I think you'll probably, I'm not 100% sure on this, and they could end up scrapping the plan because of what happened against Auburn. But I think um, he's a much better run defender than anything else they have at star. That certainly plays a factor because Georgia's run game, even though it has been somewhat inconsistent at times, the last few weeks, they've really started putting up some dominant performances on the ground. Kendall Milton's playing really good football right now. And so, first and foremost, even though Carson Beck and that passing game are doing some great things and they're really balanced offensively, you want to try to make Georgia one dimensional. That should be the goal and put as much on the shoulders of Carson Beck as you possibly can. Now, he could end up responding well, but he's not going to add that third element, which is with his legs. He's more mobile than I think maybe I give him credit for. He's not a statue back there necessarily, but he's a much more pure pocket passer. He's not Jaden Daniels. He's not going to be Peyton Thorne. He's not going to be KJ Jefferson. And so I think that, Alabama didn't have to worry as much about the QB keeping the football as they have in some of these other games that's really caused them problems. But with, Downs, him being up there playing against the run, that's going to be important. But also, if he's playing star, you can get more matchups on Georgia's top two target guys, which is Dominique Lovett, which he's their primary slot receiver, and Brock Bowers, who's going to be he's going to play a lot of inline tight end. You could cover him from the star position there, or you can, when he's split out wide and he's essentially a big slot, you can also line Caleb Downs up against him. And even though Downs is a freshman, from a man coverage trait perspective, he's a lot more physical against the run than Terrion Arnold, which you need against a Georgia or an Auburn. But also, he's got better man cover traits than a guy like Malachi Moore.
Yeah, that was, I've read one criticism about, or not one, there's several actually, but one that comes to mind is, that Alabama didn't play the run enough, that they should have been more aggressive against the run, and committed more defenders to it. I really disagree with that. As a matter of fact, I strongly disagree with the idea that Alabama didn't commit enough defenders to stop the run, because in a one-score game, Clint, in a game decided by one play, fine, take away 30 or 40 of Auburn's rushing yards because you committed another defender to it. And instead of rushing for 244, they only rush for 190. If you gave up a cheap score on the back end, we lose the game. Alabama loses if Auburn scores one more time. And if you don't have the single high safety, if you're just like Kool-Aid, Terrion, and Malachi, you cover the three Auburn receivers with no help. You just do it in man, no help. They run a pick play and get 7. And by the way, they ran a pick play and got open, and converted a critical third down on a pick play. That the announcers call a rub play when there's no flag. If that had happened and Auburn had scored again, you don't win the game. So I disagree that Alabama should have committed more personnel to stopping the run game. I think that Alabama, by doing as Clint was describing, moving personnel around, that was what Alabama did to address it, and it was pretty significant what Alabama did. Was it helpful? Well, that's an interesting argument for the philosophers, right? Because it didn't work great. I mean, Auburn rushed for 244 with Caleb at star anyway. Now, would they have rushed for 320 again if you'd have left Caleb at safety and put Malachi at star? I guess you can't say they wouldn't have. We don't know, but maybe. I just think that Alabama's plan about the Auburn run game, which primarily consisted of moving Caleb from safety to star again, which is hugely significant, as Clint pointed out. I think that's the wrinkle. That's the change. It just didn't work as well as Alabama had hoped, not because Caleb didn't perform as well as they had hoped. I think it just changed the back end. It changed what was happening at star, and worse, for pretty much the first game all year, the inside linebackers really struggled. I think it's health myself. Others can point to just player deficiencies if they prefer, but I think it's just Deontay playing on one ankle. Trez Marshall still affected, most likely by a significant rib injury that's kept him hobbled for a few weeks. And Jihad being a talented kid, but the least experienced inside linebacker. And Jihad, to me, Clint, how about this comparison? You know, Jihad is immensely gifted, and he's a really good player right now that's going to be a great player. But Reuben Foster at Alabama, I don't know how many people will remember this because you got to get in the recall machine to remember this. But Reuben didn't start or play a significant role with Alabama's first team until his junior season. But his sophomore year, he got a start at inside linebacker because Alabama had an injury. So Reuben had to play. And I believe it was against West Virginia in the opener in his sophomore season. And they picked on him big time, especially in the pass game. And Reuben gave up a ton, didn't play well, immediately went to the bench as soon as the inside linebacker he was replacing was healthy. And we didn't see much of Reuben except on special teams where he excelled. And then, of course, as we saw next year, Reuben was actually ready to play the position and could handle it and knew everything he needed to know and was comfortable and was then one of the best inside linebackers in the sport. I think that's what we're dealing with Jihad a little bit. I'm not saying Jihad's not ready to play. We've all watched him play. He is ready to play. But Jihad's probably not at Reuben's junior year yet. He's somewhere between Reuben's sophomore year and Reuben's junior year, right? He's going to be Reuben's junior year next year. I feel super confident of that. He's probably just not quite where he needs to be in terms of comfortability with assignments and reads. That's coming for him, but it's still a work in progress. But with Deontay banged up and Trez banged up, we're really dependent on Jihad, who's 90% of the way there, but not 100% of the way there. And I think when you combine that situation at inside linebacker, along with Caleb Downs sort of playing a new position or maybe somewhere where he's not as comfortable as he is at safety, I think that's the explanation for giving up what they did. But had they played it straight up, Caleb at safety, Malachi at star, done your normal thing, it could have been worse. It was worse a year ago. And again, not enough people are talking about that.
Well, I don't need it might have been better. Like just putting them in a more comfortable situation. It might have been better for this game. But if your plan was to play Caleb against Georgia in the way that you played him against Auburn, you needed to go ahead and get him. You didn't need him to be confused or out of sorts in the way that he was on Saturday at times against Georgia. I mean, that's when, and there's a part of me. Okay, I'll put it to you this two ways. Did Alabama approach Auburn? And this is going to sound crazy, but just go with me here. Did Alabama take a similar approach to Auburn as Auburn did New Mexico State? To a degree. Now, Nick Saban said just last week he didn't look ahead to opponents. I don't know that I'm fully on board with that. I really, he might not be putting a ton of energy, but I think all coaches are kind of looking ahead a little bit. I'm not saying that there was not a huge emphasis or focus on Auburn, But this idea that you're not going ahead and doing some things, I really do believe if they played Caleb Downs at star, there was part of that that played into this is against Auburn and this is more effective against Auburn. But I also think there was longer term implications of that move that they were also thinking about, which means they were thinking about Georgia. So I'm not saying that it was. I really feel like Auburn sold out. They really probably felt like they could have beat Alabama without preparing from New Mexico State as much, and or they could beat New Mexico State without preparing for them as much, and that would allow them to play much better against Alabama. But I'm not saying that Alabama went to that degree, but they either did that, in my opinion. I think that's a possibility, but I also think the other one is if you didn't do that, maybe you treated Auburn in the same way that Georgia treated Alabama in the 2021 SEC championship game, where you saw Alabama depleted with their offensive line. Their running back depth was in shambles just due to injuries, just was completely depleted. And Georgia really felt like, and Georgia was also looking ahead too, saying it's possible we might have to play these guys again. So we want, and we have a mulligan here. We can lose, which they did, and still make the college football playoff. So they really felt like they could probably beat Alabama with their fronts not being very creative, beat them straight up. Were due to depth issues, we're more talented. Our defensive front is more talented than their offensive line. And also their run game. I mean, they're probably going to have to be really one dimensional with Bryce Young. So it was like they found out real quick getting in that game they were very wrong, and Alabama ended up winning very handedly. And then you saw them in the rematch. They knew everything was on the line. They knew what didn't work that first time around. They did some different things, and they presented a lot more challenges. Part of me feels like Alabama thought, okay, we can be more vanilla against Auburn because we think we're so much more talented than them. Georgia's playing Georgia Tech, and that is going to give them a little. And now, granted, that game ended up being a lot closer than I think a lot of people were anticipating. But my point here is that I wouldn't be shocked at all if that was the approach that Alabama took. Was that the correct approach? I don't know, but it's really something to look at because just watching the way they attacked Auburn, I didn't see a whole lot of creativity with Tommy Rees. I didn't see a whole lot as far as Alabama was not being ultra aggressive in how they were attacking Auburn's offense. I think they'll be much more aggressive attacking Georgia. There was a couple of moments on Saturday, but not too many. So I think it was just a different approach, Jimmy.
Well, it's a little bit of, and agreeing with what you're saying entirely, because I really do. It's easy to hear this pitch at defensive staff meeting when you started the Auburn, when you got the real Auburn game plan starting to be put in. It's the final two opponents that are on the schedule, Auburn and now Georgia's on the schedule. Right? It's the final two. Okay, where is Auburn going to hurt you the most offensively? Well, quarterback runs. I mean, that quarterback runs, and to some extent, Jarquez Hunter. I mean, that's what you're worried about going into Auburn, because that's how they hurt Georgia, a team that has similar defensive personnel to Alabama. So a possible solution is getting your best run defending guy in the back end more involved in getting plays stopped at the line of scrimmage, whether they're quarterback runs or Hunter. Therefore, moving Caleb Downs, Alabama's best tackler in the secondary, into a position where he's more involved in the run game. It makes all the sense in the world. Now throw in, Clint, what scares you the most about Georgia? What does Georgia do that we worry we won't be able to defend? I think it's Brock Bowers. I think getting Brock Bowers covered is difficult. Where does Brock line up the most often where he hurts people the most? The answer to that is in the slot. And who's covering the slot receiver in Alabama's defense? The star. Moving Caleb to star for the last two games makes all the logical sense in the world when you look at it that way. It addresses what Auburn does, which scares you the most, and it addresses what Georgia does that scares you the most. And the solution, or a proposed solution for both situations, is Caleb Downs, who's would be Alabama's best matchup with Brock Bowers, because Caleb can run with Brock and he's physical. Alabama has other DBs. I've seen people say, "Oh, or Brock Bowers, you just cover him with Terrion Arnold." Well, Terrion can certainly run with Brock Bowers and outrun Brock Bowers, but him getting out physicaled by Brock would be a significant risk that you run there. Caleb just stands up better to Brock Bowers physically. If you want to cover Brock with a linebacker, well, he's going to outrun those guys. So you've got to match speed for speed. I think Caleb can run with Brock, and Caleb is just the answer to Brock Bowers. He was also an answer to being more aggressive at the line of scrimmage in the Auburn run game as it relates to quarterback runs and Jarquez Hunter. So moving Caleb to star in that sense, as Clint said, taking not only Auburn into account, but Georgia into account, it makes all the sense in the world. Now, did it work? That's the more interesting question, because Alabama almost lost the game. But I would argue they didn't almost lose the game because they gave up too much in the Auburn run game. They did. But Alabama almost lost the game, Clint, because I think they didn't cash in on the scoring opportunities, whether it was a Reichard missed field goal, whether it was touchdowns getting called back due to penalty, whether it was simply not executing well in the scoring area. I think that is why the game was almost lost, more so than giving up the 244. Again, Alabama gave up 320 to Auburn last year and still won the game easily because they did execute better on offense.
There are some things that probably Georgia's going to look at from this game, and they might try to implement some of it because Alabama struggled with it. Now, I think that once you separate from it and you can go back and watch the film and figure out some different adjustments and how you're going to go about attacking it, I think Alabama will be a lot more prepared for the misdirection stuff and the use of pullers and things like that to get linebackers moving in the wrong direction. And, some of the route concepts and things that they did, the rubs that you're talking about, that Hugh Freeze kind of came up with for this game. And they'll try to implement as much of that as possible, but I also feel like Alabama will be better prepared to stop that sort of stuff because they've seen it now. At the same time, though, I don't think Georgia, they don't have Hugh Freeze calling the plays. They don't have him dialing this stuff up. And I think they're more Alabama. Like Alabama doesn't feel the need to out scheme everybody. I'm not saying that Tommy Rees can't get into his bag. A lot of your top offenses, they're going to be able to do that. But 98% of the time, 99.9% of the time, really, when Alabama steps on the field, they're the more talented team. And so you see them approach things a little bit differently. Auburn knew there was such a talent discrepancy between the two. They did things to try to compensate. And so some of the things that caused Alabama issues, I don't necessarily think Georgia's going to do those things because they are kind of set in their ways. They do think they don't have to be super creative and over the top. They got freaking Brock Bowers. Auburn doesn't have Brock Bowers. And so that, you're going to rely on him and do some things a lot more straight up than what Auburn's going to do. So that should comfort fans to a degree, especially when you add in that Carson Beck is not overly mobile and he's not going to put the strain on you defensively with his legs that some of the other quarterbacks that have given Alabama trouble have. But you also need to understand that, a guy like Caleb Downs playing the position that he does or that he did on Saturday, you might see some Deontay Lawson. I've seen some fans mention that they would love to see Lawson lined up on Brock Bowers. I don't think you want that right now. It's going to happen. Telling you it's going to happen. There's going to be situations where he's going to have to, but he has not looked. He looked a step slow against Auburn, but even before this second ankle injury, following the first one, when he came back, I thought, especially in coverage, he was lacking a little juice that he had previously. He was not nearly as effective. And so a fully healthy Deontay Lawson, I think the combination of Lawson and Downs would actually be pretty effective against Georgia. I'm not as confident in that with Lawson being where he's currently at. Hopefully he'll be closer to 100%. He'll be a week further removed from the injury, but we'll have to wait and see. Bowers is going to get his, though. But I will say this was the type of matchup that made Downs such an important get for Alabama. And that's if they might scrap this altogether. They might have seen the Auburn game and thought these guys just aren't comfortable in these roles. Let's get them back. You don't want Caleb Downs, who's one of the best safeties in the country, playing another position if it makes him uncomfortable. And now he's a shell of his current self. Or Malachi Moore, being uncomfortable or confused, and that leads to some breakdowns against a very underrated Georgia passing game. So they might scrap it. I could be completely wrong on this, but if they continue down the current path that they're on, this was the kind of matchup that you envision for Caleb Downs. You would like him to be 6'2", but he's got the size, being 6 foot. He's ultra athletic. He's very physical. He can man up with guys. And I think that if you're going to cover a Brock Bowers, you need to have that unicorn defensively. And Caleb Downs is that unicorn. That doesn't mean that Brock Bowers won't get his. I think he's such a talented player. Those kind of guys, they're going to get theirs. It's just limiting the impact that he has in this particular game compared to letting him dominate, much like he did against Auburn and a lot of other teams.
Yeah, I think that's the matchup Alabama wants in terms of one-on-one is Caleb on Brock Bowers, and it'll be up to Mike Bobo to say, okay, well, that's the matchup Alabama wants. This is how we're going to use Brock to get some matchups that we want, and they want Brock Bowers on a linebacker. And Alabama's linebackers are pretty good in coverage compared to most human college linebackers. Deontay is pretty good. I think Jahad's better than people think. Jahad can cover. He's a gazelle type, to me at linebacker. Even Alabama's outside linebackers that have been, I think, really good on the wheel route, which is the hardest thing I think for our outside linebackers to do is run with running backs down the sideline on that wheel route. But they covered that really well. I think Alabama's linebackers are good in coverage. Are they good enough to cover Brock Bowers? No, they're just not. And neither is anyone else. That's why I think he's, in my mind, the best college tight end I've ever seen and is going to be spectacular in the NFL. But Caleb is who Alabama wants on Brock, and it's going to be sort of a battle between, it's the chess match, right? I mean, there is a chess match, and the chess match is important when it's Alabama versus Georgia because the athletes are so similar, elite athletes on both sides. And the chess match becomes a bigger part of things than it normally is for Alabama. Just like Clint said, Alabama doesn't have to play chess of the 11 games they played during the season. Checkers was fine in 7 or 8 of them. You only had to play chess a couple times, but you do have to play chess with Georgia because they have matchups that we want to avoid because we're not sure that we can, that we have the manpower to do some things to defend them and vice versa. So that will be the funnest part of the chess match for me to watch, Clint, Saturday is the fight about covering Bowers. This is how Alabama wants to do it. This is how Georgia wants to attack it. And that'll be interesting. And the Auburn game, I do think, as you said, could help prepare Alabama in that sense, but it is a wildly different game. That's why when people say, how did Alabama look so bad against Auburn in 21 and then beat Georgia 1 week later? It's a wildly different game. This is going to be wildly different than the Auburn game in terms of the matchups and the chess checkers thing. It's wildly different. Auburn versus New Mexico State and Auburn versus Alabama, wildly different, probably mostly from a motivational sense. Hey, it's college football. It's not the NFL. It's hard for these kids to get up in games where they're a favorite. It's hard to take everyone super seriously. It's the magic elixir that Nick Saban has, while Saban never loses those games. Other normal mortal college teams do lose games like that every blue moon because you're just not mentally ready to play. And New Mexico State fits the perfect profile of the team that will upset a better team because you hear New Mexico State and you think one thing, but New Mexico State's actually a pretty competitive football team that plays well together. And New Mexico State went to Jordan-Hare believing they were going to win the game. Most of the non-SEC teams that go into an SEC stadium like Jordan-Hare don't give themselves a real chance. New Mexico State believed they would win, and Auburn wasn't ready to play. And those two things lined up, and they won the game. Against Alabama, you better believe Auburn was ready to play. And because it's Jordan-Hare, because of their success there, and because Hugh Freeze is pretty innovative, Auburn believed they could win the game. And that's why it turned into a 60-minute thing. One question I have for you, Clint, to be on the Auburn game is this. It's probably overstating it a bit, but Had the Kendrick Law touchdown, had that counted, and they not called the hold on what was, in my opinion, was a hold. But if you're going to call that hold, then get ready for Flag Day, because then you got to call all the holds that look like that the whole game. I mean, it's not fair to just call it once when it happens 25 times, but nevertheless, it was a hold, in my opinion, just a hold that's normally not called. But had they not called it and Kendrick Law scored and it been 14-0 at that point in the game, how different do you think this game would have been?
Completely different. Yeah, I don't have any doubt about that. That would have played into what Nick Saban admitted after the game was kind of the game plan. You know, it was to establish an early lead. It was to put Auburn in a position where they really didn't feel comfortable running the football because you're running a lot of clock and, you know, you're down multiple scores and you got to put up points. That's going to allow your pass rush to tee off. If there's one thing that frustrated me, I mean, there was a lot that frustrated me, and I'm sure it frustrated a lot of fans on Saturday was when Alabama would be in when Auburn would be in second mediums or second and longs, like a second and 6 or second and 9. There was one situation where there was like second and 17, and Auburn ran a quarterback draw. They put the back in motion, it creates empty, and they go quarterback draw. How Alabama didn't see that coming is beyond me. And I'll tell you why. It didn't take this isn't a hindsight thing. And maybe I should have brought it up beforehand, but I thought it was kind of obvious. Auburn was not going to believe in their tackle play in a drop back passing situation against Alabama's edge rushers. Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell combined for 16 pressures on Saturday. It was only the second time in Dallas Turner's career that he's had double-digit pressures with 10. They each had a sack. Justin Boybe had a sack, but Auburn only attempted 16 passes. And part of that is because when you're in second and 17, they're like, I don't want what you would typically, there would be a passing down, and you're going to try to drop back and throw the football. It was something that was getting Alabama's offense in trouble early in the year, where it's second and long, and Tommy Rees is calling Milroe as a drop back passer, and it wasn't Alabama's offense. It's not Auburn's offense either, which is why I said going in, if you can stop Auburn's run game, stop them on early downs, you're going to stop Auburn's offense, period, because they don't have the type of offense that can compensate and do the drop back passing. And so if you're Alabama, they weren't going to let Alabama beat them that way. They weren't going to turn a second and 17 into a freaking third and 20 or a third and 22 because it was a sack, which is going to happen if you try to drop back multiple times against them. So the fact that Alabama did not see that coming and what happened on that second and 17, I'm pretty sure Peyton Thorne ran for a first down on a quarterback draw. Kind of similar situation with Jackson Dart when he ran for that 10-yard touchdown on the goal line on third down again, back in week, 4, I believe. It was like, that's the part that bothers me is just think about how Auburn's approaching it. And this is what offenses all year. It's third and long. What are offenses doing? They're running the football against Alabama's defense because they're putting the cheetah package out there. But plus, they want to limit the impact that Alabama's edge rushers have on the game. And those are the scenarios where they're going to make their biggest impact. That was the part that was frustrating to me. But Alabama would have had a lot more of those opportunities if they established a multi-score early lead. That was what Alabama planned to do. It's what they had hoped to do. And that would have given them that opportunity. Instead, they don't. It gets called back. They have to punt. Auburn ends up scoring a touchdown, evens it up at 7-7. The entire way that Auburn wants to continue to approach their game plan, what they envisioned for how things were going to play out, they were able to do that because of that difference. And so, yeah, I definitely think it played a huge part.
And I think this week, some of that is solved in the sense that, as you pointed out earlier, Georgia's going to play more straight up. I mean, this is a good opportunity for Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. This is going to look like, and it would be part of, because we all know Nick Saban always sends a memo to me asking me, okay, what should I really emphasize this week in my speeches? I would emphasize 3 letters a lot this week. NFL. Alabama's players, they sign with Alabama. This is why they sign with Alabama. It's not the collective like Auburn thinks. They sign with Alabama because they know or feel like Alabama can better prepare them for an NFL career than anyone else can. I want to play in the NFL. Alabama will prepare me to play in the NFL and showcase me for the NFL. and this is my path to playing pro football.
Darnell Wright for Tennessee last year, he ended up being a top 10 draft pick, and 70% of it was his performance against Will Anderson when Tennessee played Alabama.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And that's why Alabama is kind of a walking 33rd NFL team, or 34th, because Georgia's right there with them, frankly. And what I mean by that is I would emphasize a lot of NFL stuff this week. And by that, I mean telling your players, all right, y'all want to play pro football? This is your game, because you know what? They're all watching. This is the game they're going to watch first. They're not watching Auburn. They're not watching South Florida. They're certainly not watching Middle Tennessee. When the NFL is deciding whether they're going to draft you in the first round, this is the tape they're putting on, the Georgia tape, because you're going up against the same dude that you're going to play in the NFL, and in a similar style of football. It's not Auburn's innovative run game. It's not some spread up. It's not Lane's up-tempo spread. It's not a super athletic quarterback that is going to go to the NFL and play a different position. We're playing against an NFL offense run by players you will see in the NFL, and the entire NFL is watching. This is kind of what an NFL game is going to look like. And I think to the fans at home, I think, style-wise, you will very much feel like you're watching, the Bengals play the Lions. I mean, it's going to be straight up. It's going to be athlete versus athlete, and there won't be the normal dramatic changes you have to make game plan to game plan. I've heard a college coach say this one time, Clint. It's kind of the biggest difference between college and the NFL. The NFL teams have wrinkles. They have things that they do that might be a little bit different than other teams in their division, and they have different strengths because they have different personnel to an extent. But generally, you don't overhaul game plans because this week you play the Chiefs and the next week you play the Cowboys. You're not tearing it up and starting all over because this week you play the Saints and next week you play the Rams. In the NFL, you sort of put it in and it's sort of the same thing week after week, right? In college, it's dramatically different. One week you're playing a spread. Next week you're playing a team that runs it. Next week you're playing Hugh Freeze. Next week you're playing Lane Kiffin, who couldn't be any more different offensively. Well, this is going to be a little more straight up. This is a mirror. It really is, to some extent, a mirror. And this is what Alabama practices against every day. It's what Georgia practices against every day. I think the chess game is important because they have dudes that we're like, I don't know, we match up with that dude. So it's important. But all the stuff that you talked about before, how Auburn would go empty and you would be screaming. I can hear Clint right now screaming at the field when Auburn's empty. It's going to be a draw. It's going to be a draw. Hey, you know what? When Georgia goes empty, they're throwing it. They're throwing it because they're going to do exactly what NFL teams do when the NFL goes empty, unless maybe you're playing Lamar Jackson. They're going to throw it, and it's a little more straight up. This week, Tommy Reese, Kevin Steele, T-Rob, all you guys, this week, Georgia's going to do probably what Alabama would do.
And that is such a good way to put it, man. It really is, because that's exactly what you're looking at. Like Auburn going in knew, gosh, we're at such a disadvantage with our tackles versus their edges. Georgia's not going to feel that. Georgia's going to believe in their tackles to get the job done. Are they going to believe that their tackles are going to win every rep against Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell? No. But they're going to a lot more so play things straight up. If it, like you said, if it's 3rd and long, granted, if you catch Alabama off guard with the run, that has worked for some teams. It's allowed them to sustain drives and things like that. But Georgia's going to feel confident in their ability to drop back and throw the football in those situations. And you're also 100% correct. Now, granted, you got those small, Kyle Shanahan runs a certain offensive style that's a little bit more innovative. Brock Purdy, if he goes anywhere else, he's an awful quarterback. I'm going to tell you that right now. Good quarterback for Kyle Shanahan, would not be a great quarterback anywhere else. And to some degree, Tua Tagovailoa, if he was playing on a lot of other NFL teams, I'm not saying that he would be terrible, but I think him with Mike McDaniel And with the style of receivers that they have that can create yardage after the catch, he does a lot more stuff vertically. It doesn't get enough credit for that, but that's exactly what he had at Alabama. He had these receivers on quick slants, on RPOs, all these different things that you get the football in their hands. He puts it in a pinpoint accuracy position where they can create yardage after the catch. And that's what helps make them effective. But if he went and played in some other different styles of offenses, I don't think he would be nearly as effective. So you have these different nuanced styles of offense sometimes, but it's not as drastic as you'll see in college football, where it's just two completely different things in 2 weeks, and then they throw in a third different thing the third week, and it's just constantly trying to stay ahead. And this is a style of game where it's a lot more NFL approached. Georgia's going to be bullheaded in what they feel like they can do, and it doesn't matter who lines up against them. We believe in what we do well, and we're going to do that. We're not going to switch up a ton and throw a lot of new different things at Alabama because we think we can beat Alabama with what we do. We don't let others dictate what we do. Alabama's got that kind of same approach, offensively especially, where it's like, we can beat people. We don't have to do these certain things and be all creative. Now, here's the thing. With a Caden Proctor and the fact that he's had some issues, I think he's certainly getting better. I think we all can acknowledge that. But you look at that and you say, okay, maybe, a couple of years ago when they played in the SEC championship, Alabama was like, we have such a problem with our offensive line and we don't have a whole lot of running back depth. And we're going to have to do some different things and throw some different things at Georgia. It was a different approach then because their offensive line was such a liability in some key places, and they were lacking the ability to be two-dimensional due to a lack of running back depth. So it was a little bit different of a situation, but will Alabama take that approach a little bit with Caden Proctor? Maybe, but at the same time, Georgia is not as athletic or as talented on the edge as they have been. They haven't gotten a ton of production out of their edge players in really recent years. They've been really dominant with their defensive front. They've had, obviously they had Nolan Smith go in the first round, so it's not like they didn't have talent, and he was stupid athletic for an edge guy. Tons of athleticism, but I think Georgia can be beat up on the edges a little bit, especially with the quarterback run because of their deficiencies as far as their edge players. They got some good players. I'm not saying that they don't, but my point is that maybe Alabama looks at them and they say, well, Caden Proctor might have some issues if Nolan Smith was still out there, but he's not anymore. And so we feel like he can kind of hold up, and maybe they don't do a ton to compensate. But yeah, I think that you put that perfectly. It's more of an NFL approach to this kind of game than maybe it's going to be in a lot of other ones. Quickly, we don't want to spend too much more time, but I do want to talk about the offense and the fact that, some areas where they did well. We haven't even really acknowledged the play. Fourth and Milroe, fourth, whatever you want to call it. There's 37 names out there that people are calling it. It's what's your preference. But before we get to that, I want to acknowledge the fact that a lot of Alabama's offensive issues early in the year especially, crept back up. The snapping problems, the penalty problems, the touchdowns being called back. So a lot of different issues that you saw early in the year kind of crept back up. But what I will say is that the two differences is the offensive line held up better in pass protection. They were able to run the football a little bit more consistently. Jalen Milroe was willing to run the football in the second half. And that was another one that was kind of crept back up in the first half. He was not really willing to run the football. And so you had the touchdowns getting called back. You had the snapping problems. You had Jalen Milroe not running the football. There was just so many. I was watching. I'm like, man, all these issues that were a problem early, they're doing all of it now. What's going on? He was willing to do more of that in the second half, and it made a pretty big difference. But it was not only his ability to run the football and willingness to in the second half, but it was also his growth as a quarterback that helped him. He didn't turn the football over like he had done earlier in the year. And that's another key stat. He's the first Alabama quarterback to go into Jordan-Hare Stadium since 2015 and not turn the football over. That includes Jalen Hurts. That includes not Tua Tagovailoa. That includes Mac Jones. That includes Bryce Young. 3 NFL starting quarterbacks. So that's something to acknowledge as well.
Yeah, I mean the play, right? I mean, we'll be talking about it really for the rest of our lives. You know, it's been talked about from so many angles. I don't want to just beat the horse. I'm not going to say dead horse because we want to talk about that play for the rest of our lives, but not enough credit to me is going to Tommy Rees in the sense that, hey, you know, everybody's got a Hail Mary play, everybody's got a wing and a prayer play. I appreciate Tommy Rees's design on the play, where it's really Tommy Rees who designed this and came up with the idea that, hey, while everyone in the stadium is expecting it to be what I refer to as a bunch play, which is just put a bunch of guys in the middle of the field and throw it up, and it's just a jump ball. I'm going to see if I can't get a one-on-one. How can we get a one-on-one in the end zone? And we're going to do that by running crosses to feed the middle of the field and have our quarterback look at the middle of the field while we're putting all the eye candy there, but we're actually going to get what we want off into a back corner and can't see if we can't get a jump ball one-on-one, as opposed to four of our guys and seven of their guys, which you're literally a prayer situation. What frustrates me, Clint, is when I've seen it referred to as a Hail Mary or Alabama's last ditch chunk into the end zone. That was a designed play, designed to get a one-on-one matchup in the back corner and an open receiver in an area thought impossible to get someone open. So not only the credit to Milroe for an A+ throw, and Bond, I told a national media guy this the other day. You know that Bond play, that was Marvin Harrison. That was a Marvin Harrison play. That's straight out of top 10 pick in the NFL draft. That is just elite wide receiver play by Isaiah Bond. So Milroe Bond, but also credit to Tommy Rees for what amounted to an extremely well designed play for the situation.
Uh, couldn't agree more. I don't think it should be lost on anybody how that play played out. Because if you go back and watch, and I still have not gotten the all 22 film, they don't release it until Mondays, and sometimes it could be, a little. It's in the morning on Monday, so I'm sure it will be released soon, and I can't wait to go back and watch. So I only have so many angles to look at, but from what I remember, uh, I thought it was interesting. I don't remember who all was on the field for the play. I know Amari Nablack was. I know Jermaine Burton was. I'm guessing Kendrick Law, maybe. It could have been Malik Benson, but really, you look at it, who's the smallest receiver out of all of them? Isaiah Bond.
Bond, yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't think that was a coincidence. Amari Black standing in the middle of the field, and I guarantee you, before that play, what do you think Auburn was telling their players? Amari Black's the number one guy that we need to take into account here. He's 6'4", he's 233 pounds, and he can jump like a receiver. He's the biggest problem. He's the biggest threat. You stick him in the middle of the field. If Malik Benson's out there, you got a 6'1" Malik Benson. Jermaine Burton is 6 foot. And then you've got Kendrick Law, who's a thicker receiver. He's 5'11", but then the smallest receiver out of all of them. Kobe Prentice, but then also Isaiah Bond is probably the smallest at 5'11", probably 175, I think. 18. He might be in his 180s now. 182. 5'11", 182. But I thought that was interesting. I don't think that's a coincidence, because when I saw him jump up and make the catch in the corner of the end zone, my thought process was that's about the last guy you would expect to do that. If I'm speaking candidly, I would have, Jermaine Burton's the number one receiver. That would have made more sense. Amari Black would have been the guy I would have thought they would be trying to get the football to. Maybe a CJ Dupree. You have him down there maybe, but in that particular situation, you're splitting wide. You're getting guys downfield. So I don't even think he was on the field, because they knew Auburn wasn't going to rush a whole lot. So I think it was a lot more by design than a lot of people realize. And so you do need to give Tommy Rees credit for that. You need to give Jalen Milroe a ton of credit for that. You see that throw all the time. But when the guys have to make that throw, you see it go out the back of the end zone. They throw it too far. or there's a reason that a lot of teams like to throw it to the middle of the end zone and not try to paint the corners, because you got to be a lot more accurate painting the corners. If you go too far, if you throw it left, I mean, it's possible you could have pushed it too far left out of bounds. And now it's just a ball that sails over the head that way. You're already dealing with the back of the end zone, but now you got to deal with the sides. And yet Alabama had enough confidence in Jalen Milroe to make that throw, which I thought was pretty big. So, I mean, just all around spectacular play. And it is very 2017 national championship esque in the sense that it was a terrible, you had like really, it was more of a problem. You had the bad snap and you had Jalen Milroe crossing the line of scrimmage on the previous two plays. But you also had Tua Tagovailoa taking the sack against Georgia in the national championship. So just one play there, but it was coming off of like that's the one thing that couldn't happen. And I said that too. I remember saying that when Tua Tagovailoa took the sack, that those words came out of my mouth. I said, that's the one thing you couldn't do. The one thing. I said the same thing 2 plays in a row against Auburn. I said it after the bad snap. That's the one thing you couldn't do, because now, your percent chance of converting due to the distance is now second and what, 20 something or whatever it was. Now your chance, you need to pick up a lot of yardage on second down to make this manageable. And then he crosses the line of scrimmage. He throws the football. It's like, just run, dude. Like, put yourself in third and manageable instead, or third and manageable, excuse me, because you're going for it on fourth. But instead, he decides to stop and yet again throw the football past the line of scrimmage. Now you back it up even more. That's the one thing you couldn't do, that or take a sack. And yet you saw the miraculous finish. I mean, it was spectacular, and give everybody involved a lot of credit, because Alabama, speaking candidly, should not have won that football game based off of the way that things played out late. And some of that's fortune. Auburn muffs a punt. I mean, was it something spectacular that Alabama did to create that? No, not really. It's Auburn making a mistake. But when Alabama got their opportunities, McLaughlin's got to fix those snapping issues. I understand that sometimes a defender might clap and get away with it and cause some confusion there. I understand it's a road environment, but that cannot happen. And we've talked a lot about if that doesn't get fixed from McLaughlin, it's going to end up costing Alabama a football game. And I thought that moment had come on Saturday. I thought, here we are. And fortunately, once again, I think it's interesting. A lot of his snapping problems, Jalen Milroe has been the one to overcome those and throw some touchdowns, run some touchdowns. And once again, it wasn't on that particular play that he was able to overcome it or overcome is the way to put it. But he, on the very, 2 plays later, ended up overcoming it by throwing a touchdown strike.
Yeah, it's so strange that basically the very first play of the season that we can remember from Jalen Milroe, the first spectacular play Milroe made, bad snap. Snap gets past Milroe. Milroe runs back, picks up the snap, then runs it into the end zone. And that's what sort of kick-started the Jalen Milroe era, right? And now you've got bookends. Now you've got the bad snap that ultimately put Alabama in the 4th and 31 situation. So we'll see. I saw some people saying surely they'll make a change at center now. I don't think so. They changed punt returners late, and that surprised me. It would certainly surprise me if they went to Dalcourt here for Georgia. That would surprise me, but it is a big problem. We thought the problem was solved. We thought Seth had really addressed it and gone to that, I forget what they call dead hand snap or some sort of crazy term they have for it, but he changed the way he snapped the ball, seemed to really help until it didn't help. And frankly, the snaps were bad all game. Obviously, that was the highlight snap, or the low light, that skipped past Jalen, but the snaps had been low and hard the whole game. Milroe was back there catching fastballs. I'm telling you, I've said all year, Milroe deserves a gold glove for how many bad snaps he's rescued and how many bad snaps he makes look just a little off when in fact they're really bad. And he's just been a shortstop back there all year. And it's something that really needs to be addressed, particularly in the offseason. I asked the question on the BOL roundtable. I think it's the most interesting question to ask is, who is Alabama's center going to be in 2024? Is it going to be Seth returning Is it going to be Terrence Ferguson? Is it going to be James Brockermeyer? Is it going to be Rock Montgomery? Or is it going to be a transfer portal guy? But I know this, the current situation is just unsustainable. So Milroe bailing out Seth again. But, when Seth gets the snap right, he's actually not a bad center at all. But, whoa, that's pretty rough.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different directions they could go with that. I could definitely see it being Seth McLaughlin. We talked about that a ton. You would get 4 of your 5 starters on your offensive line back. I think from a continuity perspective, that would be huge. But I also think it's possible that they turn to the transfer portal depending on who's available. But I also could see. I understand Rosh Piercebaker he had played a lot, he had started a lot, so it's a little bit different. But kind of just when he first made the transition from guard to center, he looked like a fish out of water. He didn't look overly comfortable with it, and he just continued to work at it, and he ended up becoming a very good center for Alabama. By the end of his career. And I could see Terrence Ferguson doing something similar, where when he makes that transition, he's already been doing it a little bit, but you're probably going to see him in the spring if they decided to make that move because they're getting Jaden Roberts back. They're getting Tyler Booker back. Maybe Booker kicks out to right tackle. But you've got a lot of young guys, a Lennon and, just a ton who could end up, Elijah Pritchett could end up being a guy who kicks inside the guard if you move Tyler Booker out to tackle potentially. But if that ends up happening, Terrence Ferguson might be, still looking at the third guard spot. And if he's good enough to get, I've said he feels like a center to me. He feels very Rosh Piercebaker-esque, in my opinion. And so you might see him struggle in the spring if you were to make that move with it. But I think by the start of next season, he would be pretty serviceable. And I think that would be a great way to get a very veteran player who's played a little bit of football, but he's also been in the system for a long time. That would give him an opportunity. So I don't know. That's a topic for a different day. Here we are jumping to kind of into 2024 when Alabama's got this biggest game of the season coming up against Georgia. We're going to be talking a lot about that this week. A ton of content is coming. I'm telling you, the matchup breakdowns are so fascinating. It's such an up in the air type of game. I mean, I don't understand. I saw some people this week, or really this weekend, right after the game on Saturday in particular, but some Sunday morning, talking about how Georgia's going to skull drag Alabama, and you're basing that off the Iron Bowl and just the fact that Alabama has had some struggles this year and Georgia's looked a lot more clean, even though I think they were very vanilla against Georgia Tech. I really do. I think they kind of were saving some things for Alabama. I think that being a close game isn't, as people are going to point to that, and I think that plays to a degree, but I wouldn't read too much into that performance. But everybody's saying Georgia's going to kill Alabama based off of what we've seen, and my point is did no one learn from 2 years ago? Because that's all I heard after watching Damian George and Chris Owens get slaughtered against Auburn in the Iron Bowl in 2021. All I heard about was this Georgia defensive front is going to murder Bryce Young. I mean, he's a 165-pound quarterback, according to all these people that were over-exaggerating, and he's going to get killed back there against that Georgia front. And what happened? Alabama won by 3 scores, 41-24, I think was the final. If I'm not mistaken, or I guess that's just 2, but still.
41-24.
Yeah. So 15 points, 2 touchdowns. So I think it's a little premature for that, but we're going to be covering it at BamaOnLine. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this video, share this video wherever you can. We're trying to grow this channel, and y'all's help is so important to that. Like, we've already grown a lot, and we're continuing to keep this content rolling. But the bigger the following and the more that it's beneficial to us and the higher ups as far as doing more of these videos and more breakdowns and discussions and all these things, the more that you can do your part and like, subscribe, share, do all the things, the better it's going to help us. So we appreciate you guys more than you could ever know. And certainly we will be back. We might break it down into 2 videos. We might be able to do an LSU style where it's like Alabama's offense versus Georgia's defense, Alabama's defense versus Georgia's offense. We'll have to wait and see depending on scheduling, but we'll be doing Thursday Night Tide. Travis and Charlie will be doing the 5 questions. You got the recruiting roundup happening on Monday. There's no better place for Alabama video content and podcast content than right here on the BamaOnLine YouTube channel. So definitely like and subscribe. Jimmy, as always, I appreciate you, brother. This has been a great conversation. Always like kind of fleshing things out after a big game like this, and I'm sure we'll be doing it a lot more this week.
I knew as much as that happened in that Auburn game, it was going to be impossible to cover it all. But I also knew we could not stay away from Georgia. I think it's one of the biggest games of the Nick Saban era.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, and that's I was telling my fiance, I love these kind of games because I don't know that Alabama's going to win. I'm not going in like overly confident, and it's like even though I kept telling people last week, Auburn can present some challenges for Alabama. Anybody that's saying that this is an automatic blowout, that's a little bit a little bit too much. I can see plenty of scenarios where it ends up being close, but in this game, I don't see many scenarios, hardly any, where either team blows the other one out. And so that it's just such a different approach, and that makes it so much more fun. And I mean, you're not going to find content any better anywhere, I promise you, than over at BamaOnLine, over on the Roundtable message board. I mean, we've got some posters that are breaking down some stuff from the Auburn game. I mean, I'm going to go in and read. Someone sent me a screenshot, and now I kind of want to go dive in and see what they had to say about the Iron Bowl. But just the information and knowledge of some of the posters over on the round table, it was super impressive. The conversation's always great. The questions are great. We try to stay involved, but also all the premium content. I'm telling you, you're not going to get better coverage of this weekend's matchup than from BamaOnLine, from the roundtable message board, and from the BamaOnLine YouTube channel. So we appreciate you guys. We will talk to you guys soon.